stuff. So thanks for hanging out. Just, man, awesome talk. Awesome talk. Really enjoyed it. So what are we talking about today? Real briefly about who I am, as soon as my slides work. So my name is Wolfgang Goerlich. I am security strategist with CBI. I am one of the organizers of Converge. And I talk to developers and to play with code and to get my hands messy. And what's interesting about developers, right, is they build these systems, they get all excited, they're building some great stuff. They talk about at conferences. They're like, hey, we got this going on, we got that going on. And then it hits the market, it becomes a product, it's shipped all over the place, maybe like the Nest thermostat or anything like that. And then us hackers, we take a look at it and we're like, they did what? What did you guys do that? What were you thinking? And then we're like, those developers don't know what they're doing. But we never short circuit that, right? We wait 3-4 years from the developers being excited and doing cool stuff to us actually go, oh, bad developers, you shouldn't do that. So for a long time, I've been looking at ways to shorten that cycle, and I think we're making some good progress. I was out at CodeMash in Kalahari in Ohio in January, which was great in the frozen tundra of Ohio. My car actually froze to the parking structure.
Speaking truly as somebody who lives in Michigan, you call it frozen tundra.
No, that part was the frozen tundra right in the lake. I'm in southern Michigan. It's okay. I can jet it. But what was cool was there was a talk on Docker, right? Anyone know who Docker is? A couple people? Awesome. I was like, hey, yeah, man, I wore those pants back in the day. I'll go to this talk. And I walked in, I'm like, all right, let's learn about Docker. And it wasn't pants. And I was like, oh, I'm disappointed. But it's this, it's application virtualization, right? So you have containers, and the containers move around. It's cool stuff for developers. And they're all excited about it, and I was all excited about it. And I'm like, someone's going to do bad stuff with this. And I looked at the DEF CON schedule, and sure enough, there's a DEF CON talk about breaking Docker and how bad Docker is. No one should use Docker. I'm like, yes! That's only about like a year difference. That's pretty good, right? We're shortening this cycle. So we're getting better every time, and with conferences like Converge and CodeMash and these conferences that bring the security folks and the developers together, we can start having this conversation and getting people to know what to do. Because it's a real problem, right? So what is the problem we're trying to fix? The simple fact is that, we know this. Every application we build is going to be attacked, right? People are no longer breaking in through the firewall. They're no longer, I'm going to do some remote exploit on TCP/IP and I'm going to own your... No. They're going to go over to the website or they're going to do social engineering. And now that they're going over the web apps and they're going over mobile apps, our firewalls don't work. Right? The way we learn to secure systems, you need an antivirus, you need a firewall. Doesn't work. We already punched the holes through the firewall. We're encrypting all the traffic, so we can't use IPS-IDS signatures. It doesn't work. And meanwhile, they're writing all this code, and it's a steady state of vulnerable code. The code continues to be bad, which we'll talk about in this talk, and the defect density continues to be about the same, which we'll talk about in this talk. And now we're putting more and more code on more and more devices, and we're putting these things everywhere. So this talks a little bit about development processes, it's a little bit about development life cycles, it's a lot about defensible applications, it's about what do I do to help my developers make better stuff so that we can focus in on more challenging issues. I'm not going to do an OWASP Top 10 talk. I'm sorry. I've given so many of those. And I'll get to why I'm not going to do that in a minute. I'm also not going to do any exploits or whatnot. There's lots of great exploits going on today and tomorrow. So let's talk a little bit about steady state of bad, right? I mentioned OWASP Top 10. Everyone knows OWASP Top 10? Yeah, the 10 not bad things. Okay. The two that have been on there forever is like SQL injection and cross-site scripting. Ever in a day, they've been there. I was working on a project, on a pen test, and the guy's like, I'll try this, I'll try that, I'll try this. And I'm like, oh, I got this. And I get in the keyboard, and I'm like, semicolon, update table. And I gave myself $20,000 because this kiosk system. I'm like, yeah, I got $20,000. And the guy's like, wow, you know SQL? I'm like, yeah. And he's my pen tester. He's always trolling me. He's like, and PowerPoint. Look at you go. Someone should give you a raise. I'm like, you're going to do that, weren't you? He's like, yeah. But SQL injection's been there forever, right? I mean, my daughter has like a bracelet with SQL injection that she used to carry around just to remind herself of the characters. It's bad, but you'd think we're getting better at fixing SQL injection. So what has been the result of OWASP Top 10? So we've had OWASP Top 10 since 2002. I've given more OWASP Top 10 talks than I can count. You guys have probably sat through more OWASP Top 10 talks than you guys can count. So let's take a look at a chart that I think really illustrates the point of the great impact we've had. And I say this as the guy who, co-founded OWASP. I love OWASP, don't get me wrong. But what I'm about to show you is a chart of defects. Defects from a company called Veracode. Veracode does static analysis. So they take the code, they run it, they check it for defects. This is the first time the code's been checked. That's what this chart is. So new developer, hey, my shiny code. Give it to them, and they say, all right, what's your number of defects, all right? 2 lines of this, SQL injection, cross-site scripting. Charted over time. You guys ready? The tremendous impact of OWASP Top 10. From 2010 to 2013. And the report's very, very great about it. They're so casual. Like, the prevalence of trends remains flat. No, we're doing a sucky job. Guys, we are flat. And every app, everywhere has SQL injection, cross-site scripting. One of the things we do at CBI is this thing called the CBI Academy. And actually, one of my Academy kids is speaking on payment processing. He did some Apple Pay hacks on B-Sides Detroit. And it's great. I'm like, hey, guys, we want you to hack some applications. Like, okay. Pick one. Pick 10. Well, which ones? It doesn't matter. Just pick one. No, I really need to know. I don't know. It really doesn't matter. Pick 10. I guarantee you're going to find SQL injection. And sure enough, 3 out of 10 apps, SQL injection. 6 out of 10 apps, cross-site scripting. Every single time. Bam, done. It's everywhere. We're not doing a good job. And this gets to a metric called defect density, right? So defect density is the number of lines of defects in a code base. And Converge did a huge report on this. They looked at open source, they looked at closed source, the whole debate of whether open and closed is better. They looked at old programs, they looked at new programs. Needless to say, the older programs have been around for a long time. They've worked a lot of the defects out. Newer programs, lots of bugs. But they found, on average, very consistently, 0.69 defects per 1,000 lines. You're like, that sounds pretty boring, all right? But think about this for a minute. 0.69 for 1,000 lines. How many people are killing Windows 2003 this month, you guys, right? We're bearing this thing finally? Thank God. Yeah, a round of applause for Windows 2003. The OS that launched 1 million careers. With the first malware outbreak I faced, I was a newly minted security manager at a financial services firm, which will be unnamed. And all of a sudden, a whole bunch of boxes, you couldn't log in, things weren't working, it was just a mess. And we're like, what's going on? It was Blaster. You guys remember Blaster? Like, Blaster took out everything. All right? So let's back up. 0.69 defects per 1,000 lines. I mentioned that, right? This is the line of code that was Blaster. Whack, whack, my name, computer, whack, share. We've all typed that 1 million times. Then we're doing any error checking. That was it. 1 line of code, no error checking. Okay? So, Windows 2003, how many lines of code? 50 million about. How many defects is 0.69 defect density? 34,000. Have we had about 34,000 patches? It certainly feels like it. Only takes 1 line, and you're done. You're done, right? And then you got Blaster, and everything's all over the place. That's closed source. We talk about open source, closed source, much more secure. We all heard about Heartbleed. Heartbleed, same thing. 1 line of code. They weren't doing proper error checking. iOS with Go to Fail a couple years ago, same thing. 1 line of code. They doubled error check. Do you think that'd be better? Maybe that compensate for Heartbleed. We've checked twice. Nope. So we got this steady state of defects, and it's been 0.69 for like 10 years. So any code base that you guys have, you can pretty much predict how many defects are in that, and a good percentage of them are going to be security defects and let people in. So I got a great idea, right? So we got this bad code, and we've got all these known defects. Why don't we put it everywhere, right? Well, how about a ubiquity computing? IoT is now hot. The first time I was exposed to IoT, again thinking about developers doing cool stuff and then us responding and educating, more like us responding, oh my God, what did they do? It was a conference, and the guy's like, look, I can turn on my light bulbs from home. And he showed this whole thing that he wrote this framework, and it ran on his mobile phone. And I think the phone was like BlackBerry. It's pretty old. And it ran on his mobile phone. He could turn on and off his light bulbs. And that was pretty cool. And that was really cool at a developer conference because like I hosted it at home and here's how I did Comcast. And I got my DNS set up. So I pulled him aside afterwards. So I'm like, yeah, that's really awesome. Are you doing any boundary checking? He goes, what? I said, are you doing any like authentication? He goes, huh? Dude, I'm just trying to turn on my light bulbs. Not error checking. Don't make this heavy. I'm having a hard enough time turning them on and off. But what happens with that code base? It gets shared. He copies it. He shows it to his friends. Someone pulls it off of SourceForge, or not SourceForge, Stack Overflow, and blah, 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 blah. And now we got all this vulnerable code that people are sharing around. So lots of people are doing IoT right now, and it's this huge risk. Right now we've got 4 billion devices, according to Gartner, and they're predicting it's going to go up to 25 billion devices. 25 billion devices that in their heart of hearts has some code that someone thought was really cool to turn on a light bulb, and now we're putting it everywhere. This is great. So I used to tell my developers, I was like, every single line of code, you write one line of code, you've increased our attack surface. No matter what it is. One line of code, we've got a bigger attack surface. So let's put it everywhere and see what happens. It's going to be a very, very interesting couple decades. So what I started thinking about this as is more of a cultural problem. How can we get ahead of the issue and engage people culturally, right? And start having these discussions earlier on so that it goes from 3 years from me seeing a light bulb to everyone talking about IoT to 1 year from Docker to Docker at DEF CON to maybe those problems don't even occur because the people in this room are hanging out with the developers and we're showing them some things and they're showing us some things and we're removing the issues ahead of time. So I looked at some culture. I started thinking about ways that we could address these issues because ultimately they are cultural issues. And I stumbled across the Security Culture Framework. This is put out by originally by Kai Rower in the Rower Consulting Group. It's a free download. They're now working with the ISO folks, 27001 and 02, and they're working to make it an international standard. It's pretty interesting because everyone talks about managing culture, but I very rarely see anyone who actually does it or has a plan for it or a framework for it. And Rower has a pretty good way of doing it. So the SCF looks like this. You plan out some stuff, you track some stuff, and you have a whole bunch of stuff you want to get done. Pretty straightforward. But how do we decide what to plan? How do we decide what to do? How do we make sure that we're moving the needle for developers? That's what I'm going to look at today very, very briefly. In general, it comes back to the development life cycle. We had a speaker yesterday who was talking about SIM, and he said, the thing with SIM is people buy SIM, and they just plug it in, and they think they're good, without thinking about it as a program, right? It's not just technology you put in place and life is good. Well, the same thing oftentimes happens with our software security program, right? I bought this cool code scanner, so I put it in and we're good, but no one uses it. I bought this fantastic WAF, and I put it in, but no one's monitoring, so no one uses it. So it really comes down to integrating the security products into the development lifecycle at every step of the process. And that sounds great, but that's a whole bunch of stuff to do, and right now our developers are busy, and they're shipping code, and they got lots of stuff going on. And anyways, we've got this transition, right, where the older developers are moving off, and the newer developers are coming in, and they're trying to get their stuff done, and they're learning from the old guys. They're like, hey, use this code, and they're copying and pasting, and it creates a whole bunch of ripple effects where the things don't get done, don't get implemented, and we can't necessarily just say, all right, stop all the code work, we're going to put in a new process now, because then they'll throw us out of the building. So if we agree that we need to address this with culture, if we agree that we need to do this with a framework, it ends up being a way that we have to phase this in a slow and steady way, in a way that doesn't shock the developers, in a way it gets buy-in, the way it gets things done. One way to measure that change is something like a maturity model, right? So there's a couple good maturity models out there. BSIM is one. So BSIM is Building Security and Maturity Model. And what BSIM did was they went out and looked at a whole bunch of secure code bases, secure programs, secure teams, and they polled them and said, hey, what's working? What's not? What are you guys doing? And they ended up looking at 6 to 7 different initiatives that met all their criteria. And they had a couple thousand people, lots of developers, brought it in and released version 5.0. So you can download this. It shows you the best ways to do SDL today, the best ways to do secure development today. And they got a great logo that looks like a timepiece. I love that. And they got a spider graph. I like Excel. So I was really happy with this. I like this model, and it shows some of the best things that people are doing. Things like, how do I do metrics? How do I make sure my development code is compliant? How do I train my developers and everything? So this shows you a maturity model, but doesn't necessarily tell you how we get there and how we phase it in. But it's a good target. The other version of the maturity model is SAM, Software Assurance Maturity Model. And so BSIM is reflective of the industry, right? They surveyed a bunch of people, what's working, what's not. And SAM is more prescriptive. They went out, they talked to some security professionals, they talked to the OWASP people, they gathered a whole bunch of information and said, thou shalt. Here's some great ways to do things. You should do it this way. SAM has 4 different business functions. SAM's the one I'm going to use today. I kind of flip back and forth between BSIM and SAM, but SAM's from OWASP. It's free. It's the same thing. We're going to use SAM today. And SAM looks at things like governance. Hey, how do I do metrics? How do I do policy? Construction. How do I build my code? How am I testing my code? Am I doing static analysis? Am I doing something with Veracode or with Fortify or what have you? Verification. Am I doing a pen test? Is the attackers coming after my code? Are they testing? Are they beating on it? And then, of course, deployment, right? So now that I've got it in, how am I maintaining it? How am I making sure it runs? So that's BSIM, that's SAM, that's SCF. At this point, you're probably wondering, what the heck? What's the point of all this? The point is, if we've got a maturity model, we've got a cultural model, how can we push this out in a way that makes sense and gets the developers doing what they need to do? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to select a maturity model. That's easy. We're going to go with SAM. We're going to evaluate our development program. So you look at your development program against SAM and see what's working, what's not, where the gaps are. From that, divide it up, right? Divide and conquer into a couple month tasks. Here's what we're going to do this quarter, that quarter, the next quarter. Create a roadmap out of those, and then leverage the SCF to implement it. So we know what we need to do. We know how we're going to get there. We know what our topics are for each step of the way. We can then begin to implement those using a cultural approach. And track it going back to that defect density. So what is the number of defects in our code? How many of those are critical? How many of those are high? How many of those are defects that allow the bad guys in to break in and get the data? Topics come from the gap assessment. The roadmap forms the planner. And it can be charted up something like this, which is a zoom in, and it's a little bit fuzzy, but this is right off the open SAM page. So you can show, hey, here's what we're going to phase in the new threat assessment model. Here's how our education is going to tier up. Here's how our strategy is going to tier up as we go in step by step. That makes sense? Cool. Questions, comments on that? Awesome. All right. So what we're going to do is, in the next 10 minutes, 15 minutes, is do a sample case study. It's just a fictitious organization that brings together a lot of lessons learned I've seen from building SDL programs, integrating secure things like static analysis and web inspect into their systems, et cetera, et cetera. So this fictional company is named Sitting Duck Shipping. I love Sitting Duck Shipping. They're Yeah, no, I'm not. No, this is being recorded for posterity. I'm not going to say it's Sitting Duck Shipping is a fictional shipping company bringing the best of the best in modern day shipping using rubber duckies. By land, by sea, by water, ship by duck, it's the best. But Sitting Duck Shipping needs to add in a new application, and that's what we're going to use the SCF for. We're going to take a look at their processes, we're going to do a roadmap, and then we're going to do a phased deployment, which will look at identifying issues, building up this new application, doing some static analysis, addressing technical debt, doing some pen testing, and then automating the whole process. So Sitting Duck Shipping, notice that they're starting to lose some business, right? And I always imagine the CEO of Sitting Duck Shipping like this really old crotchety guy who just finally gave up his Palm Pilot. And maybe he's like, these dang iPhones. But they recognize that they need to do online shipping, they need to do mobile shipping, they need to make things easier. Right? Because when you ship by a duck, you don't want to have to call people. It needs to be simple. So this is the application. This is the first application they're going to put through this SDL. This is the first application they're going to build securely. Step one is, hey, let's look at what they have today. One of the things about developers that's great is that they build a repository and they copy and paste and they build their application. This is Cookbooks, right? Here's how I do some cookbooks. Here's how I make this. Here's how I make that, and I put it together. If we use static code analysis, which will look at the code base, look for known issues, roll them up, identify common attack patterns, run SAST across their current system, right again with Veracode or Fortify or what have you, we can get an idea of what their normal developers are looking at and what their normal mistakes are. And we can then give them some input, some insight into, hey, here's not an OWASP top 10, but here's the sitting duck top 5. Here's the top 5 that you guys need to know and need to fix. Coming out of that, you may notice that, hey, we've got this huge, horrible, bad vulnerability that we need to patch right away. And we're not going to stop development, but that's a great time to put in the WAF, give some feedback to the firewall guys to look for it. We're also going to notice some instances where we can start training them. Hey, here's some mistakes you guys are making all the time. We're giving some training for that, and we can go forward. Of course, the WAF isn't a solution, right? Did you guys hear about the Russian CTF team for MySec? A couple years ago, I was coaching it. So the Russian CTF, the worldwide CTF, there's like 150 teams, and you all get on this VPN, and they give you this server that's known vulnerable. It's got like, you know, a bad web app, a bad mobile app. I think this one had like it was running DOS, which was kind of weird. I mean, a whole bunch of bad apps, really bad stuff that's easy to break. You can blow on it, it falls over. I could probably do it. It's bad. So they give you these servers. You got to stand them up and you got to protect it, and then you get X number of time to protect. And they flip a switch. The VPN opens. Everyone can attack everyone else. So we're like, I know what we're going to do. This is going to be great. We're going to deploy a WAF. So we get this site up. We get everything going. We put in a WAF. In the first, 3 hours of this 8-hour competition, we're killing it. No one can get our flags. We're stopping everyone in their tracks. People are coming at us. We're like, yeah, come at me, bro. And no one can get to us. We're like, yeah, we're so badass. And meanwhile, we're trying to figure out, how to get other people's flags. And I think it was maybe 3 hours, 3 hours and a half. We see in the chat, oh, do you know Team So-and-so, MySec? I think they're running a WAF. And everyone's like, oh, they are running a WAF. Oh, here's a WAF bypass. Boom, we get killed. And I was like, I thought our WAF was going to save us. And my red team guy looks at me and goes, you're such a security officer sometimes. That's mean, bro. I really believed in my WAF. The point is, the WAF is great for buying us time, right? When you got 8 hours and hackers are trying to kill you, 3 hours is pretty good. 3 hours is real good. In the real world, maybe that's 3 months, which hopefully gives you enough time to start building the patches and fixing the underlying issues. But 3 months is pretty good. I'd take 3 months any day over nothing. So we identify those, we plug in the WAF, and we go. And then we start sharing some of our findings with the developers. The issue that I see 9 out of 10 security programs that fail is right here. Your security guy goes, I know what I'll do. I will get buy-in from the developers by educating them on how much they suck. Right? And they're like, see this pile of paper? These are your findings. And did you know on line 57 you are not properly commenting? And the developer's like, get out of here. What are you doing? Never, ever. If you do SDL and you take nothing away from this talk, never, ever, ever, never give them the full issue list on the first scan. That's bad. They'll hate you. They'll think, what are you doing to me? And it doesn't help, right? It doesn't help at all. If we can aggregate those up to the sitting duck top 5, awesome. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to give the sitting duck guys their top 5. We're going to train them on that. We're going to throw in a WAF, and we're going to start building this new application. As we build out this application, of course, we're going to find some issues. So we're going to have to set up some SLAs. When we find X number of issue, if it's vulnerable and it's critical, we're going to fix it within Y amount of time. And we're going to give them the timetable to do that. So now we're building, right? So we educated them, we prepped it, we gave them some guidance on how to write code. Now they're in flight, they're building this web application, they're testing it out, the mobile guy's going on, he goes, oh yeah, I do see a sitting duck on my phone. He's happy, life is good. As they're building new code, we want to use a static analysis tool to scan that code at check-in, right? So it's the same thing with IT. You know, you build something, that's the time you want to fix it because it's in your head, it's fresh. You let it sit for a year. I have no idea how I configured that. It's the same thing with developers, right? When it's in mind and it's fresh, they can scan it and fix it as they build. Life is really good. Life is phenomenal. So we want to give them that power right up front. Not fixing all the bad issues, but as they build. So as they go through phase 1, they're building this agile code base, or about 100,000 lines of code, so you can do the math on how many problems they have. They're scanning every 2-week sprint. They build, they scan, they build, they scan. And about 90 days in, we're going to go ahead, which will be about 12 weeks and 6 sprints, and flip on to the next phase. We've discovered some problems early, we've resolved it early, we've given them some guidance, life is good. Some of the things that we want to check for here is, hey, are we tracking, you know, is the sitting duck 5 vulnerabilities flat like that code or the chart I showed you guys from Veracode, or is it going down? If it's going down, we're doing good. If it's going up, we're doing bad. You get the idea. And then we can start working with false positives. We never argue about false positives, right?
Yeah.
Never. Never, ever, ever, never. So the one way that I love getting around false positives is right off the bat, take it off the table. Guys, this is a static analysis tool. You are so much smarter than this tool. It's going to tell you a whole bunch of bad stuff. We got to figure out ways to trick the tool. So write your code so it passes, and we're good. Because yeah, maybe it isn't right, but we want to make sure that we pass this tool, and you got this, and take it right off the plate. Right? We're not going to argue if it's false positives. We're not going to bring in a pen tester to test every finding. We're not going to. You get the idea. So we go ahead. We're building the code. We got executive support. We're starting to do the scanning as they build the code and check it in. So SDL, they build the code, they check it in, we're scanning. And we're beginning to expand the code base, right? So now we've got it working on a mobile phone. We've got it working on a website. The demo looks nice. The graphics designers have put on the logos. Everything's pretty. And that's about the time where they realize, okay, to make this all work, we've got to hook it up to our ERP system, right? We've got to ordered, insert to our ERP system. Which is about the time you run into this guy. The old curmudgeon who owns the code base. It's like, not in my day. I've got no problems. And I love my favorite comment is, the SIM is the problem because it's giving me all these alerts. And a very close second and applied to this is, the static test tool is the problem because it keeps giving me all these alerts, right? No, these are real alerts. So we got to watch out for this old guy. And if we know him right away, you know. Luckily, they asked the sitting duck people, they know who their old guy is. They kind of like bringing him donuts and doing everything that Johnny Christmas talked about yesterday. And they've got him on their side. Because if you don't, he's going to stop it. He's going to stop it dead in the tracks. And then you've got this bright, shiny, secure website with his API and his phone that's talking to an ERP system that was never, ever designed to go outside the firewall, was never, ever designed to be protected. And we've got a clear path into all the data. So we'll go ahead, we'll get them on our side, we'll start looking at some of this old code base and start helping them remediate things. But at this point in time, our developers should have a better idea of how to write code and how to fix old broken code. And we can start tracking that effort over time. And once we get to a point where we're looking at the old code base, we can also start looking at some of our third parties, right? Some of our most vulnerable code is in that third party, like Heartbleed and everything else that we're shipping now with our product. So we can start expanding that down. But with third party and with old code and everything, you run into the truck factor. Do you guys know the truck factor? The number of developers that can be hit by a truck and yet the program still runs. I'm not making this up. It's in Wikipedia. You think I'm joking. Huh?
I'm just agreeing.
Yeah. Symphonos, yeah, he's like, no. As a fellow developer, I know the truck factor. Absolutely. Yeah. But the rest of the guys are like, there's a truck factor? We don't have that with hackers. We run them over all the time. And they actually did analysis of it, like the major GitHub apps, and they're like, oh, Bitcoin has a truck factor of 3. So if the government really wanted to stop Bitcoin, no, never mind. Puppet Rails has a truck factor of 7. So what does this all have to do with development? One is all apps are like X number of people away from no one being able to fix it. And if you think about most apps running from life cycle to life support, that's what happens, right? Our developers left. When I was at the financial company, we had an app that was maintained by a guy who worked for a guy who once interned for a guy who another guy. And it was like this whole long string of, yeah, I think so-and-so who wants to do so-and-so. We literally were like pinging LinkedIn and using Maltego to find the one guy who knew how to fix this. It was bad. Thankfully, social engineering saved the day, but it was bad. So, and we're going to run into that when we're touching these code bases, right? People haven't touched it for a long time. And we have to know where those systems are and either navigate around them or, by putting a WAF or putting some technology, or figure out a way that we can get inside and start fixing those things. But those are the big pockets of problem. So that's takeaway one. All apps are, X number of people away from no one knowing. Takeaway two, I think it's a great slogan, right? Ship by duck, not by truck. Save a developer. I really think they should capitalize on this. I'm talking to their marketing people. So the other thing we run into is, all right, so we don't know who wrote this code. We don't know what it means, but is it exploitable? And an exploitable argument is one that often comes later on in the project as people have started to clear off all the easy things and people are writing clean code. And it's a very good question. But the challenge there is machine time is cheap. Application pen testers are expensive. So we want to make sure we're only prioritizing the is it exploitable and finding the answer to that over things that actually are likely to be exploitable and will have a high impact. We don't want to be testing every single SQL injection, but the SQL injection that leads to data loss, absolutely, let's test that. The rest of them, let's just assume it is and fix it. And that's the other tension, right, between fixing and testing and deploying functional code and deploying security code. So, is it exploitable? We'll address that, headed off of the pass. As the code begins to mature, we'll get more and more code coverage, right? So that static analysis tool is running on more code is being produced correctly, and we can begin to automate it. So continuous integration. Anyone in Kevin's talk yesterday? Kevin Pentowski's continuous integration? No? Okay, so continuous integration, right? You put your code, it's ship, deploy, it's constant updating in the environment. Integrating in the static analysis of that, integrating in the dynamic analysis of that, such that it doesn't ship until it is actually secure and meets a certain criteria. So they do all that. They're shipping this good code. We're about 6-9 months into it at this point in time. We worked around the ERP issue with the old crusty guy. We gave him some donuts. We fixed that, and the vendor gave us some code. We found some third-party library. We popped that up to the open source guys. They fixed that. We found these pockets where no one knows. We'll deal with that with internal WAF and pray. And finally, we get this website that we can ship, right? This unsyncable website that no one will ever break, which is awesome. So they go live, and life is good, and hopefully we don't get attacked. And that's where I'm going to end this little parable. But once they're live, now that they've had this greenfield application, it gives us an opportunity to have the same conversation with other new projects. Hey, they went live. Their ship dates didn't slip. You guys can do it too. They're good. You're good. And the developers go, I'm better than their team. I know. We could probably do it even faster. Yeah. And it gives us the opportunity then with some political capital and having the right technology in place to start looking at some of those old issues, that phone book of existing issues that need to be addressed in all the other applications. So I'm going to skip a whole bunch of slides, and I hope you bear with me. But I think we all agree we'd rather listen to Jason than this. So it was time well spent. You're like, I agree, Wolf. I am awesome. So, and wrapping it up, right? We need to reach one developer at a time. Every company is different. Every developer is different. Every project is different. But there are some great tools out there to look at things culturally, to look at things from a framework. There's things that will do the automated testing as it builds. There's things that do automated testing as it runs. You've got application pen testers who can go ahead and break it and show if it's exploitable and show what the real risk is. And it's just a matter of getting in front of the developers and reaching them and communicating this out. And shrinking that time frame from building something you think it's cool to having it shipped everywhere and us realizing that there really are weaknesses. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to say here. Oh, yes, my conclusions are, hey, culture is built one action at a time, right? Every single time we write code, every time we interact with a developer, every time we interact with IT, every time we interact with business is an opportunity for us as security professionals to educate them and push the culture in the right direction. It's built one conversation at a time. It's built one story at a time. And fundamentally in the code environment, the development environment, it's built one line of code at a time. Now I said earlier you write a single line of code and you increase the attack surface, but done right with static analysis and everything else, you write a single line of code and you've developed the security culture. You've increased it. So 5 takeaways, I'll throw them up screen so you can grab them, take a look at it, read it. My contact information is very fine and easy to find if you need me. We've got the next speaker coming up here in a couple minutes, but anyone have any questions before I step off stage? Sweet, awesome. So thank you so much. Sam, you're up next, yeah? And do you want to, what's the highlight of what you're given?